Hi all. I wanted to talk about a few different things about how our brain works and how some of the things that have gone on in the last few years have used our natural instincts against us. So if we start off with the Ash conformity experiment, is that one you're familiar with? In the Ash conformity experiment, what they did in the 1960s, I think it's a black and white video I've seen, you can look this up on YouTube, was they gave test subjects some experiments to do, but what some of the test subjects thought they were doing wasn't what they thought they were doing. So they had several of the test subjects were in on the game, and it was to see how people responded to wrong answers. So for example, they had a load of lines drawn, and the people who were in on it all were saying that this line was longer than longer than this line, right? And whoever was the test subject was agreeing with them that this line was longer than this line. And it was kind of experiments like that. But what they worked out from that experiment was that people will go against their natural instincts and the truth just to go along with the crowd, to fit in, because not fitting in society is risky, isn't it? If you go back millions of years, if you were outside of the community, then your survival would be up for danger. There are some other experiments that they've done. Back in the, I think it was 60s or 70s or sometime around then, they had a load of monkeys in a cage, and then they had a step ladder, and then above the step ladder was a banana. And every time the monkeys climbed up the step ladder to get to the banana, they got a shock. So they stopped going up the ladder and they started ignoring the banana. Then over time, they gradually switched out the monkeys and brought new ones in. And if any of the new monkeys tried to go up the ladder, they'd say, they'd tell them, no, you can't go up the ladder, you can't get that. And there came a point when there were no monkeys from the original experiment left, or the original group left in there. And all of the monkeys down the line were taught not to go up the ladder to get the fruit. Now, this has been judged by some people as being, they didn't experiment it for themselves and test it, and they're just going along with the crowd. However, if you think about it, when you're out in nature, if you happen to, for example, know that belladonna berries are dangerous, and you pass that on to subsequent generations, they're not going to eat it. They don't have to test it for themselves and get poisoned and die. So actually, this learning and this conformity is a survival thing. But I think it's been used against us in the last few years. If you think about what happened during all the lockdowns and the social distancing and the masks and all of that, people who didn't conform had a very hard time. And that's because people are very uncomfortable or worried or anxious when people aren't conforming to what they feel is right or safe. So maybe that was weaponized against us. And also, of course, we have Stockholm syndrome. Now, we know about Stockholm syndrome. That's when we fall in love with our captor. But or at least it's more complex than that, if we're getting so little, then we can have sympathy for our captor, because that's what we need to do for our own survival. And if you think about what happened again in 2020, we were told that the only people we needed to listen to were the politicians, chief medical officer, etc. So, and that was a kind of Stockholm syndrome that we had with the powers that be. There are a couple more things I want to talk about, more really from a brain perspective. So when we have a lot of fear, we get stuck in a part of our brain called the amygdala. And it's a little bit like, if you can imagine riding an exercise bike in a room, you can be pedaling away as hard as you can, but you're not getting anywhere. And that's a little bit what it's like if you've got stuck in a fear state. You're pedaling like mad, but you're not getting anywhere, and you can't use your hemispheres and your thinking and your frontal cortex or anything like that, because you're actually trapped in a different part of your brain. So if you scare people with lots and lots of fear porn, which is what happened again in 2020, and tell them that terrible things are going to happen, then people get stuck in this part of their brain, and then they can't think rationally. And so all these things do kick in, like the Ash conformity experiment. So we start having to do that because that's what we feel to be safe. So it's very risky to step outside of that. And that's what a lot of us did, because we had different knowledge. Perhaps we could see that certain things that were being implemented were not good, or we knew that, you know, there was a big old scam involved. We've been over that. So where we come to manipulation, if you scare people and you know that people want to conform, you can manipulate them. Now, from a neurodevelopment perspective, I'm a neurodevelopment specialist, by the way, so I help people rebuild pathways and do it healthily. Now, when we want to create a new habit, we can repeat something. So the more we do something, the more the connections build up in our brain, because what fires together wires together. So if we've got a lot of energy going towards something, we create new links in our brain. And in our brain, we have over 100 nerve growth factors. Nerve growth factors are the chemicals that enable new nerves to grow. So one of the things I do with the children I work with is we kind of force nerve growth factors to grow. We stimulate them for specific things to rewire the body in for proprioception purposes and so on. However, if you were going to use nerve growth factors against us, I think that's what they did again in 2020. So, for example, leading up to April, when we went into the first lockdown, there was all this like misinformation and hazy stuff going on. Oh no, we're not going to be locked down. Oh, we're going to be locked down. We're not going to be locked down. And this is building tension. And nerve growth factors love all that, because that's when they're getting ready to get ready to pounce and make new links and stuff in the brain. So that April, when Bojo actually locked us down, all those nerve growth factors got fired and wired in some new connections. Okay, now combine that with the fear that we were receiving, and they're getting locked down in the amygdala. So we were in a real emotional trap. But that's not all. But we were told on that April that Bojo was going to give us more news in 3 weeks. Now, what happens in those 3 weeks is our minds are going to be going, oh, is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? Is it going to be this? We've got to stay home. We've got to do. And all of these nerve growth factors are going to be creating new nerve pathways in the brain, basically trauma, because it's being used in an unhealthy way. So we were then told new stuff again 3 weeks later, and all those nerve growth factors that were going, they then make new circuits. So, and then we were told it was going to be another 3 weeks. So basically what the government were doing with us was they were programming us, and they were programming us to do what they wanted, to stay in trauma, to be receptive to their message. Now, in narcissistic abuse, for example, there is a thing called cycle of abuse. In the cycle of abuse, it's like a circle with 3 points. So you have acting out, which is when violence occurs; resolution, when the person who's done it is really apologetic, promises never to do it again; and then tension building, when you don't know what's going to happen, but you feel something's weird, and then you get the acting out. So this is a cycle of abuse. And these cycles of abuse can be an hour long, a minute long, a year long, 5 years long. They can go in cycles, but you can have many, many, many of these running at the same time, as I know from experience, from being on the receiving end of this. So with cycles of abuse, we become chemically addicted to the abuser. So this is going back to the trauma bonding, and with the messaging that we were getting from the powers that be, and this every 3 weeks there was a new thing, and then all the different messaging that was coming out and on all the fear. So we were becoming chemically trauma bonded to hear only messages from the powers that be, who were giving us these messages. And that is psychopathic, really, psychopathic abuse and trauma bonding. And it's very, very difficult to break away from trauma bonding. It's apparently harder to break these trauma bonds than it is to get off cocaine, sugar, and things like that. So if you're going to manipulate a population, that's how you're going to do it. And it's not a kind thing to do at all. I mean, I use neurodevelopment for healthy purposes with my patients. But knowing about these things, I think, is actually quite important, because it gives us some fair understanding of what's gone on and why people could only hear messages from certain people. And if we're going to break those trauma bonds, we need to do a lot of work on ourselves to restore how we were before. I don't know about you, but I've noticed that before 2020, people in photographs smiled a lot, and now people don't really smile so much. And I think there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of sadness that's been come about as a result from all of this. But I just thought I'd say that because it's been on my mind for a while about these kind of manipulation techniques and why people function the way they do. And there's more to it. I think there's a lot more detail I could add on this. But anyway, let me know what you think. Thank you.